Okay, we're just about ready to start. So welcome everyone. I appreciate you spending a Thursday evening with me. And this is a great night to have these talks because there's none of my favorite junk TV shows on. So it's a great bad TV night. So I'm hoping that's the same for you, right? Somebody's nodding their head. My name is Joan Mele-McCarthy, and I'm the executive director here at the Summit School. And we provide community talks to the population at large just because this is our mission. We want people to understand kids with learning differences. We want kids to we want parents and educators to have some information regarding educational strategies and assessments that they might not have access to otherwise. So we look forward to your feedback after the presentation. You'll get an email. And we welcome the feedback. As I said earlier, if you are interested in putting in the chat box what motivated you to come to the talk tonight, that would be great. If you don't, that's fine. But it always helps us to know who our audience is. Tonight, we are going to talk about executive functions. It is such a huge topic. We have an hour and 15 minutes. And I dare say we might run over, but I'm going to try to keep it, at least the body of it, to the 8:15. And then if you want to hang out for questions, we can do that. I skewed the talk a little bit to not only understanding executive functions, but having a sense of the concept of executive functions during this pandemic. And how it exacerbates kids who struggle with executive function, and even those who maybe are okay in typical times, but it just kind of taxes their abilities in a variety of domains. So, so for that reason, there will be not explicit school strategies, but there will be ways for you to understand. There'll be umbrellas of strategies and interventions that you can use if you're in a classroom working with kids, or if you are at home helping your child learn virtually. So with that, I am going to present my screen. Here we go. So tonight's topic is logged in and checked out, and how remote learning has changed our children's executive functions. And please feel free to throw some questions in the chat box, or if you want to just ask a question as I'm going along, that's fine. We don't have to be so formal. I'm not going to provide you with the same rules that we give the kids when they're learning on the grid. So we have a big job to do. A huge job tonight. So we're going to do, like I said, an overview of executive functions. We're going to do an overview of why adept executive functions are important for school success. We're going to talk about some school approaches to accommodate kids who struggle with executive functions. We're going to talk about the pandemic overlay and how it taxes out some teetering executive functions, and then a little bit on how you can help your child at home with their executive functions. So the use of executive functions just basically is the thing that allows us to function well in life. So it allows us to make a plan and carry out a plan. So it enables us to say, okay, my kitchen is a mess, what's my plan? Or the whole house is a mess, what's my plan? What am I going to do first? What am I going to do second? It's our ability to say, all right, I'm going to make a recipe. Do I have all the ingredients, and can I carry it out? And in the workplace, you're always developing and carrying out plans. It also involves your ability to see relationships among things, so that when you see relationships among things, it's not like Groundhog Day. You're not learning things newly every day. You make relationships, and it's easier then to remember how things connect, and you're able to remember the concepts easily. Believe it or not, executive functions also helps with obeying social rules. It helps you understand how your behavior affects other people. So when you're snarky because you're grouchy, it will definitely have an effect on other people. And if you choose to know it and still do it, that's okay. We all deserve that. But sometimes kids don't understand that different kinds of behaviors they exhibit has an effect on their environment. Executive functions is huge in allowing you to solve problems. It allows you to think flexibly and think about different solutions. It helps you to adapt to unexpected circumstances, which is flexible thinking. So I know I come into work and I have a list of the kinds of things I might want to accomplish. And there are some days when that list is just not going to happen. So then what do I do? So do I reprioritize? Do I just spend my time on the immediate awful thing that has to get done? How do I cut corners? And that's all about flexible thinking and prioritizing and multitasking. And it also has to do with placing episodes in time and place to allow for efficient retrieval of memories. And it also has to do with your ability to hold on to information as you're talking. We call that short-term memory, working memory. It just enables you to hold on to things so that you can think about it and come to a conclusion or do something. So this is not going to be a course in Brain Science 101, but I love throwing up the picture of the brain because it's important to know that your executive functions are rooted in neurobiology. That when people forget things, or when people don't initiate tasks on time, or when they can't remember, can't hold on to bits in the conversation, or can't sequence things, or can't inhibit behavior, it's not because it's a serious flaw in their personalities or because they are being obnoxious just to be obnoxious. It's how they're hardwired. And it's all about that frontal lobe. And anyone who knows me knows that when I say to them, oh, I wish I had your frontal lobe, that's kind of like the highest compliment I can give you, because there are people who can prioritize, get things done, move on, and in a very efficient manner. And I just look at that and marvel, because, you know, I am okay, but I have to work at it. I'm not as efficient as some people. So it's all about what happens in this frontal lobe, and even more so, it's in the prefrontal cortex. So this is just a little diagram of the brain, and it tells you what the frontal lobes do. They are in charge of self-directed action and output, you know, things that you not want to do and get done. It's movement initiation, it's problem solving, and it's goal-oriented behavior. It also has the benefit of mediating speech production and helping you with output of your oral language. So this frontal lobe is a pretty important part of the brain, and it is one of the biggest areas of the brain. So you'll hear me talk about the frontal lobe as we go on. Now, this too is my favorite part of the subcortical area of the brain, the amygdala. It's located in the under part of the frontal lobe, and the amygdala is responsible for your fight or flight. So when you get overwhelmed, and when you either lash out or you shut down, or you get so overwhelmed you just don't know what to do next, it's called, by one author, amygdala hijack. And we talk a lot about amygdala hijack. I also like to use the phrase, your brain goes to snow. And when your brain is flooded with those chemicals that are from being overwhelmed or being anxious or being frightened, can't do anything. And so when kids get overwhelmed in school, we often talk about their amygdala hijack or going to snow, and maybe it's they just don't initiate work, or maybe they have a meltdown, and you cannot reason with them in the moment of the meltdown. You kind of have to wait till they unflood. So this is a really important concept to understand, because a lot of times kids don't do things just to aggravate you. Usually it has to do with the neurochemicals in your brain. This is a fun slide too. And so basically what it shows is that as children develop, all of the parts of the brain gradually come together and mature. So when you look at young children, there's a lot of green and yellow and red, which indicates a low maturity. This is a brain at 20, and the blue and the purple show that there's a lot of maturity. There's integration in the brain. The frontal lobe is very highly developed. You can make choices. You can think things rationally. You can anticipate actions or consequences for actions. And it's interesting that there are different times when you see that frontal lobe come together. So we at Summit, at different stages, we love 8th grade, September of 8th grade, because when we see those kids in 7th grade, when it looks like there is just a missing frontal lobe, and you look at them sometimes and you say, did you really just do that? And it's not that they're bad kids. It's 7th grade. That's it. They come back in 8th grade, and we call it 8th grade magic because they're nice. Right, Christine? They have their stuff together. They understand assignments. They're more amenable to those external organizers and all the strategies that you put in place. So 8th grade is a lovely time. The next time that's very lovely is junior year in high school. So sometimes kids really still struggle when they leave us. It's still not easy for them with their executive functions and all of the systems that they put in place. And they get to high school, 9th and 10th grade are incredibly hard. And they really rely on the support teachers to help them with studying, to help them with writing, to help them with a variety, with scheduling and long-term projects. But then all of a sudden, many of them at about 11th grade, all of a sudden figure it out. And they say, oh, I know how to do this. And I don't know if you're seeing it with your students. Do you see that, Christine, that about 11th grade, it starts to come together, right? Yeah, I've had high school people tell me that, like, why don't they need me anymore as much in 11th grade? And I say, it's about the blue and purple on that frontal lobe. So the other thing I want to say about that is when children are given tasks that require a lot of organization, a lot of long-term planning, a lot of detail, a lot of inference, too early, you're pushing the brain development. The brain is not ready for long-term assignments in 3rd grade. And for many kids, 5th grade is not even when they're ready. And that's when kids start getting long-term assignments. Your brain isn't really ready till about 8th grade, and then it really doesn't really start to function on its own until about 17. And by the way, the frontal lobe continues to develop till about age 28. So I know I saw it with my son when he was 25. All of a sudden it was like, oh my goodness, he listened. It worked. All the stuff I did and all the talking I did and all the aggravation I got. 25, I got thank yous. Mom, thank you for not buying me that Mustang when I was 16. I would have killed myself. Mom, thank you for making sure that I did this homework. Thank you for that tutor. Thank you for doing this. And I it was like that was a banner day when I got all those thank yous. I should have recorded them, but it happens. So how does that translate to a child's ability to do school? So when we look at elementary school, sometimes kids do just fine up until about 5th grade. And then all of a sudden they hit 6th grade and it's awful. Their grades suffer, they're disorganized, they're unhappy, and then you say, what's going on here? Well, when you think about elementary school, the teacher organizes the daily work, teacher organizes the free time, teacher gives explicit daily homework, the lessons are explicit, the independent work time increases with the grade, so they're not asked to work a long time on their own. There's lots of movement built into the lessons and the day, and there's lots of what we call I do, we do, you do. So the teacher demonstrates, then you do it with the teacher, and until the child really has it or the group has it, then they're set on their own to do a you do. But then look at middle school, high school, and college. The teacher might set out the organization for the semester. Here's your assignments, here are the readings. And not as much in middle school, but certainly they start getting that in high school. And the teacher teaches, but requires work to be done in preparation for the lecture. Long-term assignments are given with decreasing checkpoints as the grades progress. So 6th grade, those kids start getting long-term assignments. If you go back to that brain, that little brain, that brain is not ready in 6th grade for long-term assignments without a lot of I do, we do's. now there are some kids who can do it, but it's hard. And then you have a child with a weak executive system, and you put those long-term assignments in. It's just a recipe for disaster. Ability to work independently is an expectation when you get to middle school, high school, and college. And there are many middle school kids who just are not ready to work completely independently. And there's lots of you-dos. There might be one I do, and then it's a you do. Might not be a we do in the middle of that. So then, your question is, well, when do you start to see executive function? Sometimes you don't see it till middle school. Sometimes you don't see it till high school. But there are some times when you see the little ones, the toddlers and preschoolers, and when you see a lot of anxiety, emotional breakdowns, meltdowns, when you see a reduced ability to follow those preschool routines, like after a month, they don't know to come in, put their stuff in their cubby, sit on their square. That has to do with executive functions. And oral language too, organization of oral language also has a lot to do with how settled and steady your organizational system, your executive system is. So once again, with anything, it's a matter of gradation. So you can be really mildly affected, or you can be really severely affected. And so here at the Summit School, we work very hard to make sure that we help kids develop their executive system. But there are some children, by the time 8th grade comes along, that despite our best efforts, they still struggle. And so we send them off to a high school that we know will still be their surrogate frontal lobe, that will have the kind of supports they need until that maturity sets in. But it just depends on the child. There's just not one kind. So when we look at that development of the prefrontal cortex, where all of this magic happens, through high school, children lean heavily on the regulatory capacity of their parents and their teachers, which I said before is a surrogate frontal lobe. So do you have, the parents say, do you have all your papers for your driving test, or clean your room, or do you have a test tomorrow? And this is what I got from my son. Mom, the plan is, there is no plan. And he was very proud of that. Functioned, through a lot till college with that. Or I have a report due tomorrow. Can you help? Or plan ahead for a project. Why would I even want to do that? So so that's what happens with some kids. But there are some kids, like my daughter. She wanted to know from age 4, Mom, what are we doing today? And she would make sure the day was set out. And she was the one, in the morning, even when, first, second grade, she would make sure that we had her lunch done the night before. It just depends on the child. So executive functions, you engage executive function skills when you engage in self-regulation. This is your ability to manage yourself. So you might get upset at your child or your spouse, or at the TV, something that's being said in the news, and you have to engage in self-regulation not to go off the deep end, right? So you calm yourself, you think about what you can do, you walk away. That's self-regulation. Kids develop self-regulatory skills as time goes on, and they develop those self-regulatory skills as language develops and as inside self-talk goes. So by the age of 7, kids can do a lot of self-talk, and that helps walk kids off the ledge when they get really upset. We find that kids who have meltdowns that are not typical for like the age, for like 6, 7, 8, they don't do a lot of self-talk to figure out how they're going to step it back. Self-direction for our day-to-day and longer-term functioning. So when we think about what we're going to do for the day, or what we want to accomplish for the week, that's what we're engaging our executive functions in. Purposeful management of thinking. So that goes back to self-talk, internal self-talk. And so if you allow your thinking to be random, like when I have a lot to do, like I'll have my calendar here and I'll start to work on the calendar to list, and I'll go, oh, wait a minute, I have to do that email. And then I'll go here, but then I have to kind of say to myself, no, I'm going to manage my list first. And then after that, I'll take a break for email, and then I'll go back to the tasks. And you have to think about that and talk to yourself about that. And purposeful management of behavior to achieve some desired outcome. And I know we've all done it. We've all said, I am not going to behave like this. I've got to calm down. And that self-talk helps you manage your behavior. When children cannot do that well, we see difficulties with academics, we see difficulties with behavior, and we'll see difficulties with emotion. So executive functions is not just being organized. It is all-encompassing academics, behavior, and emotions. Oh, so there's a little emotions here. So is this your pre and or post-COVID child? Are they convinced that they're stupid? Are they bright? And you know they're bright, but they're just convinced they're not. And do they just not have that ability to do school well? They just get frustrated a lot. And you know they're bright, you know they know things, but you put them in a school environment where they have to perform, they have to be task-oriented, they have to produce, it just doesn't work. So children who have executive function dysfunction have a difficult time with adapting to teaching styles and rules of different teachers. So in high school, middle school, or high school, different teachers have different styles, different organizational systems. It is awful for kids who can't easily say, okay, this teacher needs this teacher needs this, and I'm going to adapt my behavior accordingly. In elementary school, when kids have substitutes, for kids with executive function difficulty who can't flex, oh my goodness, it's just a bad day. A bad day. Or when there's something that changes the schedule. So they come in and they know they have this first, this first, this first. And if the teacher hasn't said, well, we're going to have an assembly or we're going to do pictures, it just sets some kids off. And so adapting to teaching styles and rules of different teachers and routines is really important, but hard for some kids. Conceptualizing, planning, and implementing a research report. So once again, 5th grade, it's got to be hand over hand. I do, we do. It's very hard for 5th graders to do a research report. And then take that child with limited frontal lobe development in middle school and high school, and it becomes just a bear to do. Performing tasks that have multiple layers. So one of the tip-offs for us is that we see bright children, you engage them in conversation, they know so many things, but you ask them to write a paragraph, and it's like pulling teeth. Or the organization is awful, or the sentences are disjointed, or their ability to think about how to organize, how to get the information to write the paragraph is just not there. Oral language, sometimes kids who have very disorganized oral language, it's usually part of their difficulty with executive function skills. Spelling. Remembering spelling. So a lot of times kids with executive functions, in one paragraph, they might have 5 different versions of a word with maybe all of the correct letters in there, but just not in the right order. Capitalization, punctuation, they know the rules, but when they're writing that paragraph, there's just too many things to hold on to. So it's like they never spent a day in a language arts class. What else? Oh, and also with math. So they might be really good math thinkers, but don't remember algorithms, don't remember equations, don't remember the procedures for like long division or solving for monomials or polynomials. They just can't do it, but you engage them in a thinking process. They're wonderful, but they can't do those things that make it efficient for them to do that task. And now think about these difficulties, how they're magnified on the grid with a lot of what we call asynchronous learning. So asynchronous learning is when the child gets assignments to do independently. And last year, not with us, but with a lot of schools, the children were given assignments at the beginning of the day, and the teachers were available, but these kids were expected to do these assignments. And for the kids that had good frontal lobes, good skills, they could do it. But for the population of learners who struggled with reading, struggled with writing, struggled with math, struggled with organization, struggled with making a plan, it just was not okay, and then promoted a lot of stress in kids. So if you think doing in school is hard, take it the school on the grid, and it makes it inordinately difficult and heart-wrenching for some kids. So when we talk about executive functions difficulties, you may only see processing difficulties. You may just see difficulties with memory and organization, and their academics seem to be okay. When you dig down into the academics, their reading, their phonics might have holes in it. Their written language might not be as strong as their oral language, or might be very formulaic and not be as talented as they are cognitively. And you might see difficulties with math, but they can get the right math answers. So it's a toggle back and forth. Or you might see kids with real deficits in reading, writing, and math. And then you go and look at the memory issues, and then you go look at the organization, and you see that there is a relationship between the struggle that they have in academics and those processing components. So what can you observe about your child? Can your child plan and recognize and organize to age expectations? And what is age expectation? So, fifth grader should be able to get up, do their ablations, get dressed, get cleaned up, and get to the breakfast table and get out to school on time. So that's what we would expect of a fifth grader, even third grade and fourth grade. But for kids who don't initiate well, don't have a good sense of time, I mean, trying to get them up and trying to get them moving and trying to get their shoes on and out the door. I can't tell you how many times a parent has said to us at carpool, they don't have their shoes. They left their shoes home. And, what do? You just chuckle. One little girl also forgot her underwear, her underpants. Had a dress on. We don't know how that happened. Mom went to Kmart and made it right. So, you're not going to yell at the child, because it's not that they're being bad. It's just that they don't have that ability. Does your child need constant prompting to stay on task? Does your child need encouragement to persist? Cognitive juice is a big deal. Cognitive stamina. Are they okay for short bursts in the beginning of the day, but as the day wears on, do they just lose steam? Think about yourself if you have been on the grid all day long doing a seminar or meeting after meeting. How's your cognitive stamina by midday? Or if you can pull it together and just hold your stamina, by the end of the day, you are just burnt toast. And so think about it for children. If they struggle with this for the regular school day, think about what a grid looks like for them and learning all day on a grid. Does your child learn routines? Learning routines is great because then you don't have to remember that. You know the routine, you just go to the format, and then you can do your cognitive work. But when you can't remember the routines and you're trying to do cognitive work, it just doesn't work. The cognitive stuff doesn't happen because you're too busy trying to figure out what the routines are. And then does he generalize, and is he flexible with routines? Does he have a meltdown when things change? And can your child manage materials? Can your child recover easily from a setback? So when they get upset, can they just pull it back and take a minute, pull themselves together, or benefit from your calming words and your organizing words? I think, age 3, 4, they should start to recover from those setbacks. Maybe you give them another year, age 5. But, what do you think, Jen? By age 6, kids should start. Genevieve White is our school psychologist. Age 6-ish, Jen?
Yeah. I mean, it varies so greatly because kids' development varies so much, and it also depends on, the home environment and kind of what you're exposed to in terms of resiliency and those setbacks. But I would say around that would be, generally speaking, yeah.
Deal with disappointment, and then struggle with initiating tasks, homework, chores, bedtime routines, morning routines. Initiating is something that teachers also talk about to parents. He just doesn't start his work on time, and then he can't get done, or she. I always say he, but it's he or she. So the hallmarks are difficulty with working memory. You get easily distracted by things going on around you. You perseverate. You have poor flexibility, difficulty with starting something, difficulty with maintaining effort, difficulty with recognizing and or utilizing feedback. So a lot of times, especially our middle schoolers, especially with our writing process, we give them feedback. And sometimes they'll say, I don't agree. No, I want to do it this way. Or I don't want to use your explicit writing program because I don't need it. Yeah, you do. And I'm going to help you understand. And we do different kinds of things. Okay, write the piece without using the tools. And now write a piece using the tools. And let's look at the grades. So sometimes, it takes a lot of we-dos to get kids there. Modulating activity without cues. So does a child know when the joke is done? The joke is the joke until the joke is not funny anymore, right? And then poor self-awareness of deficits. A lot of times the kids, especially in middle school and high school, I did great on that test. And guess what? Not so much. They didn't, because their method of studying wasn't that efficient and it wasn't active and all those kinds of things. So, and there are certain academic tasks that I talked about. Oral and or written language could be difficulty with reading comprehension. Sometimes kids can decode beautifully, and a lot of times their vocabulary is great and they have a lot of good background knowledge, but they get referred to testing because their reading comprehension is not strong. Well, why is that? Because as they read lengthy text, they can't hold on to it because of their working memory. By the time they get to the end, they've forgotten what was in the middle. And then they don't have the cognitive stamina to go back and write margin notes. So there's lots of ways for us to kind of say, looks like executive functions difficulty. So this you were sent. We're not going to do it tonight. This is a way for you to find out what your executive function strengths and weaknesses are. And when you do this, it will blend well with what I'm going to tell you on this slide. And then it also will match up with this, which was also sent home to you. So when you understand your own strengths and challenges in executive function, I like to call them isms, you learn things that you can do to kind of do workarounds. And when you learn this, you also learn about people, in your environment, your spouse, your children, your mother, your dad, your neighbor, your coworker. And so when you understand why they do the things that just annoy the last living breath you have, it's not necessarily because they're obnoxious or wanting to pluck your nerves. It's because of the way their executive system is, and sometimes you have to kind of adapt your interactions so that you can help them be their best selves in that situation. So I encourage you to do this at home. It's very fun. My whole staff could take this from me and they could know where I don't initiate early at all. But that's okay because I make it happen. But the problem is, if I'm working with somebody who likes to get things done ahead of time, I drive them nuts. So if I have to work with somebody, then I will mend my evil ways to the best that I can and start something early. So I also kind of joke about my calendar disability. I just, I make mistakes on the calendar. So when we acknowledge it and we laugh about it, and I do the best I can, and I have people help me with my calendar. But it's okay. It doesn't mean that there's anything that's going to inhibit me from doing what I want to do in life. But you have to know your workarounds. So this is a really instructive slide. And like I said, it relates to this. So the definitions for all of these things are on this, and you got this piece of paper. So what this shows is the different domains within executive functions. So they're color-coded so that initiate, task monitor, plan, organization of materials, and working memory fall under the metacognitive regulation inventory. So those are the things that you do that really help you with being efficient. Can you start a task as initiate? Can you monitor as you go? Can you see, oh, that's not right, I got to fix that? Can you plan your work? Can you organize your materials? And oh, by the way, can you remember what you're doing and what you want to do next as you're working? That's all metacognition. The hallmark of executive function difficulty is definitely working memory, but we can also see it with planning, organization of materials. And some kids, they just don't monitor. They just don't monitor what they're doing. They just do it and then don't want to go back. This is behavioral regulation, monitoring yourself and inhibiting your behavior. So telling that joke until nobody's laughing anymore, you got to inhibit that. Or talking incessantly on the grid when other people are kind of tired of you talking is another behavior you might want to inhibit. Or monitoring what you're doing in the moment is something that you should be able to do. And monitoring your behavior. Am I being impulsive? Is my obnoxious personality disorder showing? So those kinds of things. And then we have emotional regulation, which is shifting and emotional control. Can you be flexible? Can you shift your thinking? Can you say, all right, this isn't working, I'm going to try something different? My favorite thing to say is on one of the cognitive tests, the last question on one of the subtests is the rigid persist with a strategy that has, and the answer is failed. And so you got to be able to shift and recognize if something's not working. Emotional control is another one. Having those meltdowns because you're overwhelmed, because you can't get your way, because you can't make something work. And those are the different ways in which we could look at executive functions, and we see them in school all the time. And when teachers understand this, you understand that the kid who has a meltdown is not just a kid who's just emotionally out of control. You can usually go back and say, why is this kid having a meltdown, and back task it. And the same thing with the kid that never starts their work on time, can't seem to work through a project, just it's like Pigpen and that backpack is a mess, etc. So I just put one slide in here because we definitely have very solid ways of assessing executive functions. Very important is a case history. It's not necessarily going to show by the numbers on academic tasks. Usually you get a good sense of executive functions when you talk to the mom and talk to the child and talk to the teacher. And all of the things that we just talked about are going to be part of that case history. Observations and interviews are really important. And then formal tests. There's not one test for executive function. So there's teacher and parent and self-report questionnaires if the child's old enough. There's cognitive, oral language, and academic standardized tests. And these are the things when specifically we're looking at executive function, we're looking for planning, organization, inhibition, cognitive flexibility, problem solving, and self-monitoring, as well as working memory. Working memory should be on that list. I will have to fix that. So what is COVID-19 doing to our EF? Well, the new normal has everyone's executive functions out of whack. The worry and uncertainty of what to come has our amygdala in overdrive. I guarantee you, all of us have gone to snow at least once during this pandemic time. And when our brains are flooded with cortisol, it shuts down the part of the brain that we use to make calm decisions and to problem solve. So the big picture for schools, whether we're in a pandemic or not, is it has to do with how you think about teaching and learning. So it's all about educational philosophy. It's about teacher training. It's about the classroom environment. And I love to talk about a frontal lobe friendly classroom. It's about scheduling. You can't overschedule kids. Instructional methods have to be explicit, have to give kids practice, and it has to be at their skill level. Emotional support, anticipating situations that are going to make kids have meltdowns, and being there and allowing them to have that time to let the brain unflood so that they can then start to pull themselves together and talk about what was bothering them or what might have caused the meltdown. And then there's parent and family support, because if you don't have any background with executive functions, it's very upsetting and or frustrating when your child shows a lot of those issues that I was talking about with executive function. So this was from a wonderful neuropsychologist, Dr. Kaufman. He talked about a frontal lobe friendly classroom, and it talks about small group support. Children with executive function in a big group can't do. It's way too much. You have to break it down into flexible groupings and help them break down the learning material. You have to monitor their activities, help them go through to make sure that they're doing everything that they're being asked to do. Social coaching is also important, and visual reminders. It's really important to have charts and visual reminders all over the classroom. So we have visual reminders for our phonics. We have visual reminders for our writing. We have visual reminders for our STEM. We have visual reminders for how we problem solve. All those things are needed because otherwise kids have to think about it themselves. And if their memory isn't that great, they're not going to engage in the cognitive activity. So, like I said, in 5th grade, a lot of times kids hear you have to do this on your own. And Dr. Martha Denkla, who is a well-known neuropsychologist, says on your own is a death knell for our kids who struggle with executive functions. And guess what? So is asynchronous learning. It's very difficult. So when we look at concepts for intervention, this is once again the umbrella terms that I told you about. So you connect dependency to independence. So you have to teach the child how to work independently, and it's a gradual regression. You have to talk about routines. Anything that can be routinized, make a routine so that they learn the routines, so they're not wasting memory bits on figuring out what the routine is as they're trying to do the cognitive activity. Incentives, provide incentives with really appropriate reinforcement, and allow the child to be an active partner in the learning. Giving choices is really important. And then overteach over time. Don't only think that you can do a lesson once and the child has it. A lot of times kids will look like they get the lesson during the day, and then they go home to do the homework and they don't get it. And then there's a blow up and a meltdown. And it's not because they didn't understand it in the moment. They just can't remember, or they can't remember the sequence, or they've missed a piece of information. And so here at the Summit School, our kids can call teachers. And when they call their teachers at night, sometimes the teacher just gives them 1 or 2 words and the kid says, oh, I get it. And sometimes the teacher says, you know what, we're going to have to reteach this tomorrow. Don't worry about it. And think about what piece that facilitates in the household when parents aren't worried about the child doing that homework, and the child isn't worried that they're going to have a shouting match with the family. The other thing that is not necessary is grading homework. So when parents often worry that if my child doesn't get a good grade on their homework, they're going to fail. We're not interested in grading homework. We're interested in homework being something that can help children reinforce skills, and it makes all the difference. And it's really important for kids that struggle with executive skills. So we teach new skills and content systematically and explicitly. We do that with phonics, for reading decoding. We do it with reading comprehension. We do it with written language. And we even do it with the way we teach vocabulary and understanding higher order concepts to lower order concepts in science and in social studies. We minimize demands on working memory, and we have all of those visual displays. In math, kids have math journals where anything that's a multi-step procedure is in their math journal. So like solving long division, finding a monomial or polynomial, dividing fractions, they forget the steps. And so all they have to do is go to the notebook and say, oh, okay, this is what I follow, now I can do it. We anticipate frustration or anxiety-producing tasks and set the child up for success. So it may be that we don't set the lesson up if we know it's going to set a child up, or as we want to bring the child along, we're going to say, okay, we're doing this today. This is what's going to happen. You don't need to get upset because I'm going to be there helping you. And if you don't understand it, you just come over to me, or you just go over to the other teacher. And so you set kids up for success and alleviate that anxious reaction. And you keep routines, procedures, lesson formats predictable and consistent. Really important. So now we do a lot of things here that are very predictable and that really help with the executive strategies. One of the most important things we do is a morning and afternoon homeroom. And in the morning, the kids have show their trapper keeper, which is a canvas binder, and they open it, and all of the folders are color coded, and they show their homeroom teacher what they've done for homework, and it's checked against their agenda. And if the child hasn't done the homework, the teacher says, did you call your teacher? Did you call a friend? And if the child didn't, we say, okay, we're going to finish it in study hall during lunch. Child goes to study hall 5-10 minutes, finishes it, goes outside. It's not the walk of shame. It's not a punishment. We don't give a whole lot of homework, but kids have to understand that there are many fail-safes put in place, and you use those external organizers and fail-safes so that you can manage your life and your stuff. We started Chromebooks for children in grades 6 to 8 because we wanted to move them more to an electronic platform. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. We were not interested in having the little ones have too much screen time. This is pre-COVID. We do a lot of brain breaks, and everything we do with respect to our methodologies are explicit and systematic. Social thinking, helping kids understand, when you do this with your peers or with adults, it's going to invoke a reaction. It might be a happy reaction, or it might be a not so happy reaction. School counseling, calling teacher, all of these things are things that we do that are embedded executive functioning strategies. And then comes COVID-19. Don't panic. So we knew when we had to pivot on a dime last year that we were all going to learn something new. It was all going to learn. So we spent a couple of weeks training before we had to pivot. And we put a lot of things into place that were different from what we did. So we instituted Chromebooks for all kids. We continued with school counseling, but also helped parents. Parents were struggling. They didn't know how to get their kids to do this virtual environment. We instituted a very strong Google Calendar and Google Tools. We were a Google Suite school before this, but we went to that as well for our remote learning, but then had to make some adjustments. Ian Walsh is on here. Ian, I didn't ask you in advance, but could you talk about some of the things that we had to learn about implementing and changing to help kids with executive functions as we went on in the spring with the remote learning?
Yeah. By the way, I'm Ian Walsh. I'm Summit's Director of Information Technology. I joined a little late, so I apologize that I missed the first half an hour or so. Yeah, it was, as Joan said, the spring, especially the first couple months, and I think this is the case for any other teachers on and parents have probably seen on the home side, was just kind of stay afloat and figure things out as we go. And then we started to figure out what worked and what didn't, and then having the summer to kind of reframe everything, take what we learned and put it back together. And I think that what we've learned best is kind of relying on the things that Summit does well pre-pandemic and trying to take those things and make them fit in kind of the digital classroom space. Summit's been fortunate that we've been able to have a lot of on-campus school time through the fall. So having that time with students to actually see their teachers in person, to learn some of the routines and let them carry over from in-person onto our time that we are in class online was really critical. So I think just kind of that bond between students and their teachers and learning routines, whether that has to happen live or in person, is just so important.
So we thought we had it down pat. We thought that we were going to have emails sent out with email formulas. Everybody was sending out the same emails, and we thought we had Google Classroom, the Google Calendar down pat. And then as we started implementing it, we started receiving feedback from teachers, from parents rather, and we found out that even though we thought we were helping with kids' executive functions, we weren't really, and we were taxing parents' executive functions. So we had to do a few things with Google Calendar differently, so that it became more streamlined, more functional, and easier for kids, and then easier for parents.
Yeah, I think it was interesting. When we first made the decision in mid-March, we avoided Google Calendar because we thought that it would be too much for kids, even the older kids at Summit. So we thought it would just be too much, and we went another route trying to simplify by taking away calendar, and we kind of learned that actually the calendar was so beneficial for our students, having that visual layout of their classes. And Google Calendar actually has a colored line that moves through the day, kind of showing you where you are, kind of how far you've come through the day and what you have left in like an amount of time perspective. And that was something that we implemented for this school year because it was so helpful.
Yeah, so we really learned a lot. We thought that we were testing and doing great things for our kids' executive function, even in the spring. And we learned how taxing the whole system was. And we didn't do asynchronous learning. We were teaching in person on the grid. So we learned a lot from what we did in the spring to how we're moving how we move forward in the fall. Even to implementing a remote Wednesday, so that in the event the kids had a pivot, they would be in school in person on Tuesday and they would be in school in person on Thursday. So Tuesday they were set up for the remote learning, and then on Thursday they would problem solve things that might have gone wrong. So it takes a lot of work to kind of figure out how to address the variety of needs with kids in a school that have executive difficulty. And then we also did a lot of Google Suite training for parents because we knew that a lot of times kids couldn't do it on their own, especially the young ones. And parents were called in to help kids. And so we had to help parents with understanding and changing things as we went along. We also realized that there had to be rules for engagement. And that kids could get distracted very easily. It's easy to fall off the grid. It's easy to engage in behaviors that are not productive for a classroom. So we became a little strict. We said, you know, when we're remote, camera has to be on. You have to arrive to class on time. You have to wear school uniform. Like that was like, the kids were like, are you kidding? Why? Because even though you're at home, you're still doing school. And if you get in your uniform and do school at home, then you're at school. No pajamas, no sitting on your bed, no pulling your animal unless it was, you know, okay with the teacher for a short period of time. Eat your lunch or your breakfast when you're not in class, because otherwise that relaxed atmosphere just takes away from your ability to have cognitive stamina, to plan, to organize, and to get through your day in the way you need to. We knew that frequent parent communication was important. We a lot of calling of parents, a lot of emailing, a lot of texts to say, you know, your child didn't show up. We're not, you know, we're not yelling at you, but we just need your help. And when the child realizes that the wagons are circled, then they comply better. Let's see, we also had a separate portal for parents to warehouse all communications. So much information was coming at parents that their executive skills were really getting tasked and really becoming very frazzled. So there are a lot of things that we had to do, and there's still things that we're doing as we go along to really manage executive strategies for the kids, executive strategies for the parents, but also for the teachers. It is exhausting for teachers to teach online. It is way harder to develop lessons to keep kids engaged on the grid. And so, so really, even people with really strong executive function skills, this whole pandemic has really taken its toll and really taxes a lot of us. So this is the part of the presentation where I'm going to ask you to give yourself some grace. You know, understand that in your household, if your child is learning virtually, you might have limited space. Your internet connection is always a consideration. I always do my work here at school because where I live in Calvert, the internet is glitchy and I don't feel like being aggravated. So we have this wonderful, you know, Verizon service. So I'm always here at the school when I have to be on the grid. There's competition for space and resources, and your child's computer might not have the necessary specs. And we really helped parents learn, you know, understand what kind of computers to purchase, correct? Because what happens when there's not enough stuff on the computer to make all of these things work?
Yeah, I think, you know, our challenge has been similar to what other schools have faced. And even what families have faced, and just having a device that can handle being on a Zoom or a Google Meet or a Microsoft Teams, as well as having those asynchronous assignments open in other tabs. And in the past, our school and a lot of families, I think, do this too, bought devices as kind of a companion device and something that was used to supplement the instruction that happened in school or supplement homework. And all of a sudden, it's now the sole kind of tool that everything revolves around. So, boosting those specs and finding that device over the summer became a huge challenge.
Right. And the county, I was thrilled that the counties, have been giving Chromebooks to kids. But many times the Chromebooks don't have enough power to manage all the platforms that the teachers are now using with them, and it becomes very frustrating. And if your child has low frustration tolerance, right in the beginning of the day, as soon as the first glitch happens, they're done. They're just peace out. So it's challenging. Let's talk about a few things to make it easier to understand learning in the grid and executive functions. So the first thing, I talked about clothing, why we think it's important. I talked about asynchronous learning, that, when kids are just given assignments and they have to do it on their own and maybe they can check in with a teacher. It's just a death knell for children with executive difficulties. We talked about maintenance of effort all day on the grid is tough. When we first went to remote last spring, we did a half day. We had 3 subjects. Everybody was exhausted and everybody was catching up. We were in crisis, and we did the best we could. The kids had the same instructional strategies, methodologies, etc. But we did lighten up on some of the demands because we knew that the kids couldn't do it, and we knew that our teachers couldn't come up with it. But as I said, we learned a lot, and then over the summer we trained a lot and problem solved a lot, and we knew that coming into this year, we would no longer be in crisis. We would be in long-term stamina. So, so we knew that when we had to pivot, we had to give the child as much of the same curriculum and teaching as they were receiving all day. But we knew that something had to give. So our classes in person are about 55 minutes long. When we have to pivot to all remote, we change those classes to about 40 minutes and shorten the school day. The kids can't last till 3:20 in classes all day long because we're on the grid teaching in person. So we learned that. We also learned that we have to give kids about 10 minutes between classes to get a bio break, to get a drink. You just can't sit and boom, boom, boom. And the teachers can't either because the teachers have to gather their materials. And then headphones and microphones. And when your student has their headphones on, if their mic is on, everyone in the grid is able to hear everything going on in your home. And dollars to donuts, what's going on in your home is way more interesting than what's going on with the teacher. So, so there's a requirement that mics have to be off, right? And headphones have to be on because there might be a few kids in the dining room learning remotely, in addition to parents. So microphones and headphones are really important and helps keep kids focused. The problem is that when the microphones are off, it does tamp down a lot of that spontaneous chatter about content that goes on in an in-person classroom. But sometimes you just got to do what you got to do, and you have to put systems in place to maximize attention, to maximize learning. Cameras. Cameras are a big issue for kids, and I'm kind of like the camera maven. I really believe the kids' cameras have to be on. Kids have to know that they're visible and their visibility is part of their participation. And teachers need to see the children so they know how they're reacting to instruction. I'm on a lot of adult Zoom calls, and if I'm in a meeting, then my camera needs to be on, just like it would be in person. And so I also look at this as teaching children just business skills for later on in life. However, I'm going to call upon Mrs. White again to talk about why middle schoolers are so reticent sometimes to put the cameras on.
Yeah, we have I think a lot of the students that have difficulty with turning their cameras on, there's a small portion of those students that have significant anxiety. And, it's just something about being on the grid. It's very different than in person and talking to someone. I think sometimes it's hard to kind of read expressions, body language. So much of our communication is with body language and nonverbals. So it really increases their anxiety to have the camera on. So there are times when, that's the case, but then there are other kids that just middle school. I mean, they see themselves, they're seeing how they look to other people, and that just makes them so much more insecure. It's kind of like if you were sitting in school at a desk and you had a mirror, right on your desk showing you what you looked like as you were listening to the teacher. It's really hard for our middle school kids, but it's good practice. This is kind of the way of the world right now, so it's good to do that. But I would say that there's a small percentage of kids that we do allow not to have their cameras on. It's not the norm at all, but it increases their anxiety so much so that they're not able to even, function in the classroom. But it's really case by case. And like I said, that's definitely not the norm.
Stacy, I'm with you. Stacy said she thinks her kids just want to have the camera up so the teacher can't see it. Because you know what? I know that if I'm in a meeting and I turn my camera off, I'm going to start going to my email. I'm going to go to, I'm going to do that. But if my camera is on, I'm going to behave myself. Right, Gretchen, one of our teachers, Gretchen Mayer, what are your views, or talk about a little bit about kids' behavior with camera and microphone and things that you've learned during this pandemic?
Yeah, it definitely is one of those tricky situations. And I think that, like all the other things that you've talked about, it was one of those things that, took us a little while to kind of figure out what our policy was going to be with the cameras for all of the different reasons, the things that Jen explained. The other technical issue that I find is that it impacts the processing speed of a computer. So then you're dealing with the battle of a kid getting frustrated because they're now having, lag issues and tech issues because of their camera. So a lot of us teach that at the beginning of class. We always like to see our students' faces. We can greet them as we would as much as possible in the normal, in-person classroom. And typically we'll always have them require them to keep them on during warm-ups when we're having more of a group discussion about things. And then if at any point we're going into independent classwork where they might be navigating through Google Slides or anything like that, we might allow them to turn their camera off if they're having some tech issues. Mm-hmm. So again, it's one of those things where you have to kind of have a little grace if a kid is having tech issues or if they're uncomfortable. So it just always comes back to that with me, just having grace. And, if the kids are doing work and they're learning and they're more comfortable with it off, then that's okay.
So, and the other thing is we're fortunate enough where for some children in poverty, having the background of their homes, it can be an issue, can be embarrassing. And so, in public schools, they don't have the latitude to require cameras on the way we do. And so, with Zoom, you can put a different background on to kind of mask that. But still, in different settings, there are different rules. But for us, we feel pretty strongly that we want the child to know that they're accountable, that being visible is important, and being visible, it means that you're in the game. So, but remember, when your student has their camera on, everyone in the grid is able to see everything going on in the view of the camera. So once again, what's going on at your house is probably way more interesting if somebody's painting, and this happens, painting the living room while the child's sitting there, or vacuuming, or cleaning up the dog mess or something. It happens. But we have to do to kind of maintain effort and to get that child through the day on the grid. The chat box is another issue. Gretchen, I think I'll call upon you with the chat box too.
Sure. Yeah, again, that's another part of, impulse control. When we're in the classroom, I think we refer to it a lot more as blurts, but it's kind of a whole new type of blurt that we never would have thought we could experience before teaching on the grid. Luckily, Google Meet did install some features that I think have made the chat box with a little bit more structure and purpose to it. They have some polling features in there. You can disable the chat if you need to. If you're in a bigger group setting, I think that is always really useful because it just kind of leads to more side conversations that more students can have when you're in a bigger group. But overall, I do think that the kids do a pretty good job with managing the chat box and using it appropriately. And, if they do send one or two off-topic messages, they usually can kind of redirect themselves pretty well with the chat box. But some of the new features, like I said, that Google Meet has added, I think have given it a lot more purpose and allowed the kids to kind of understand how we can use it as a tool for participation and things like that as an alternative to, our classroom on the grid.
Thanks. So, and once again, sometimes we call it rolling out of the group, and sometimes kids are in their bed on a couch with a comfy comforter and with the pet in their lap. It is just not conducive to learning. So we have said to parents, if we're going to do this, we need you to have a table set up. We need your child to be sitting with their computer at a table, because otherwise it becomes very distracting to the other kids on the grid, and then it really decreases your child's ability to gain benefit from the instruction. Coming to class prepared, and that was something that we learned, with the Google Suite and with Google Calendar. In the beginning, we were sending parents emails with the materials for class, and it just drove our parents crazy because it was way too many emails. And so eventually we figured out that putting everything on Google Calendar, including the class materials, Google Slides, and I don't have all of that because I'm not doing it, but we just know that when we really, streamlined and put everything through Google Calendar, it made a real difference. And having teachers make sure that kids who are learning remotely, because we do have a small cohort of children who have chosen to stay remote, that they know in advance the materials that they're going to need to do that science experiment or to do that project in social studies. But coming to class prepared is really important, and that's part of children's accountability. And it became even more prominent, with learning on the grid. So, and then some kids just feeling disconnected. They're kind of losing their people skills. And friends are really important to kids. Early on, friends are important. And then they don't feel like they can get the help because they don't want to ask on the grid, or the teacher doesn't have that ability to walk around the classroom and pause at their desk. So some students are really feeling disconnected. Is there anything you want to add to that, Genevieve?
No, we're definitely seeing that all around. And I think the biggest worry, I think for me and for some other people, are that, the longer we're in this, the more, the harder it is to kind of re-expose the kids, back into normal life. The kids are getting used to the technology. They're getting used to being isolated. And so they almost don't want to go out anymore and see their friends outside, or go, even if it's, a safe, socially distant, they'd rather just stay on their phones or stay on computer games or whatever it is. So that's the worry. I really encourage everyone to find activities that are safe for you and your family during COVID, to just expose them to other children, because that's the biggest worry, is that the more we're isolated, the harder it is to kind of re-engage and go back to our normal selves. We're seeing so much more. Our kids are just on their phones more, on the computers more, on their video games more, and less interest in going outside or even seeing friends again. So, that's.
So, I think my daughter is very, very cautious during this time. She's got an infant, a 4-year-old, and a 6-year-old. And so she, in the past, I would say couple since like December, maybe November. They'll do park activities with their children's cohort with masks on. And it really makes a difference to get those kids outside with friends. And it's safe. Is it completely 100%? But it's, you know, sometimes you got to do the best you can do to meet the other needs of kids. So, and there's a lot to be said about we're all stressed. Every last one of us has some kind of stress, and it's, you know, it comes out in different ways. And so in this article, it said that when you're stressed, you look to your reward center of the brain for relief from that stress. And so it says it triggers excessive baking, drinking, smoking, and shopping to help alleviate the stress. I hate to cook, so that didn't help me. There's too much sugar in the drinking and you gain weight, so I don't do that. But I can say that I've worn out Amazon a little bit. I can definitely say that. And then there's also just a little bit here so you understand, there's a certain amount of not stress, but kind of like invigoration, embracing a task and being excited and being a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? A little bit motivated, maybe a little bit stressed to have your highest productivity. But when you are overstressed, your productivity goes completely down. So if you're working from home and you know that there are some dog days, there are days when you just can't get anything done and you are just stressed. And for me, those are the days when I go home and watch the best junk TV ever. And that just is my stress reliever. And then the next day I'm ready to meet the day. Media distancing. I mentioned before that we did not do on purpose one-to-one devices for children in grades 1 through 5 because we want them playing outside, we want them talking, we want them engaging, and screen time is screen time, and we want to minimize the screen time. It's out the windows because it's all about screen time when kids are learning remotely. So that's why when you're not in school, media distance, limit TV access, limit screen time. I know that when I watch a lot of news, you know, I'll get a little gritchy, and that's when I say, okay, I'm done. Got the junk TV, got the junk shows on. And if you're really fearful, you have to stop watching stuff altogether because it just isn't productive. Jen has and Dr. Leslie Eggett had done a presentation a couple weeks ago, and they talked about resetting routines to focus on more sleep and less screen time, and make an action plan. Give your child a sense of control and reinforce their efforts. These are some really good websites where if your child is anxious, it really gives you things that you can do with your child at home to reduce the anxiety. And this is a wonderful website that can really give you different places to go, different videos to help you understand and help you work with your child on really wellness, you know, emotional wellness. And then encourage mental flexibility. You know, sometimes we just have to kind of say it's not going to be perfect. Don't let perfect get in the way of good. Reduce your expectations and accept alternative strategies and try not to be too rigid, because you know what? We're coming out of this pandemic at some point, hopefully, but there's going to be a new normal. So we can't say we're going to go back to life the way it was. Just get that out of your head. Things are going to be different. And then take action. I mean, you can do things that can make a difference. Create order out of chaos for your child and have your child take part in it. Make a plan and write it down. The I do, we do, you do with your child. Organize your child's day to make it more predictable. Incorporate breaks and stretching and snacks. Breaks shouldn't be too long. And also exercise. Get your kids outside. Like Jen was saying, the kids would rather stay because the reward centers in the brain really feed off of the gaming that happens on the screen. And you have to break that cycle. Get them outside, get them exercising as a family with kids in the neighborhood, wearing masks. It's really important. Play things that are not screenplay. Get the family games out. Go get chess, Jenga, you know, and this says a virtual game night, but playing, let them play with their friends, let them play with their family. Just, you have to kind of let go and have fun, and then try to maintain some sense of normalcy. We were all locked down in the spring. Jessica Palmieri and I were the only ones here on campus because we couldn't let it go to rack and ruin. But people were locked down. And then as we started to come out of it, people were very afraid to come out of their homes, rightfully so. But we learned so much. Masks, social distancing, hand washing really mitigates a lot of the risk with the disease. And I'm not saying to go into super spreader parties, but go out, walk in the neighborhood, put your mask on, take your children to the park with their masks on. All of our kids wear masks 100% of the time here in school, even except when they're eating. But when they're outside playing, they're wearing masks, and we thought it would be a problem, but the kids are resilient. My little grandchildren come over to my house with a mask on, and we wear masks. Otherwise, I wouldn't see them. So kids are resilient, and you have to do as much as you can to maintain some sense of normalcy. So it's long, 8:20, 5 minutes over. Here are some of my favorite books to help you with executive function. Here are resources, really good resources that are my go-tos all the time. And we do have time for questions. If you have time, I have time. So whether you have questions in the chat box, I'm going to stop presenting. Okay, and let's see. Any questions for anybody? Any comments, thoughts, concerns? There's a lot of information. I know, I do this all the time. No, quiet. Did I leave anything out? I also want to say to you too that if you're wondering if your child has executive functioning difficulties, don't hesitate to get your child evaluated, because those evaluations are very helpful to help you understand your child as a learner and to help your teachers understand what they can do to help children in the classroom. We have Taisha Peoples here on the call. We have a Summit Resource Center. We can certainly, there she is. We can help you with evaluations, or there are many other practices, in the area that can help you. Let's see. With all of the screen time for online school, plus all of the video games and YouTube happening before and after, how do I limit my children's screen time on all their gadgets? It's frying their brains and making their attention span worse. I'm going to throw that one to Mrs. White.
Hold on, let me just reread that. Okay, so yeah, this is so tricky. I mean, they have to I would just set a schedule for when they're in school, like really break it down, the hours that they're in school, the hours that they need to do their homework. And then outside of those hours, look to see, what you have free. Even if it's 30 minutes, that 30 minutes, you're going to make them take a break and do something else, and then they can get back on. You really have to break down the day hour by hour and figure out when they actually need to be on it. And then, the times that they don't actually need to be on it, there just needs to be, incentives to do other activities. So that's what I would do, is kind of break down how long they need to spend on it. It's really, really tough. It is making their attention span so much worse. I mean, it's making our attention span so much worse. We're constantly on our phones, we're multitasking, we're doing everything that we can do. And it's hard to focus on one thing at a time. So I found, like Joan was saying, doing puzzles and making your brain kind of focus on one thing at a time is going to be really helpful, and getting more sleep. We talked a little bit about that, but I think it's really important to look at how late our kids are staying up, how little sleep they're getting nowadays, and actually how much more anxious that's making them too. They just want to wake up and get right on an electronic, but maybe they need to wake up and they do have an hour between, the time they wake up and the time they need to get on the screen. So that time needs to be filled with something else besides any sort of electronics. So I'd kind of break down your day and see where the holes are of free time, and then try and fill those holes for them and give them options of what they can do.
The other thing I'd say too is that not all content online is created equal. So things like games and stuff, those things are designed to keep kids looped in with rewards and fast-moving things. All of that just accelerates the brain. The violence has been shown to kind of really weaken the attention span because it's this constant reward system. Even YouTube is designed to keep kids looped in by playing the next video after another. Netflix is the same way. So even digital online content that is much more relaxing, like drawing apps, can be great. There's great apps that have like relaxing music that's part of them. Even puzzle apps that are a little bit more slow moving, that are like strategy type puzzles that kind of slow your brain down instead of speed it up, could be good. And then the only other thing I would add is, because so many parents are home with their kids right now, is modeling good behavior with devices. So if they constantly see you attached to your device at all hours of the day and night, I think it really makes, especially for the older kids, it makes it hard for them to break free of wanting to be attached to theirs. So you setting boundaries for yourself and following those can really kind of help like set that atmosphere at home.
So several years ago, we had someone for our symposium called Dr. Larry Rosen, and he wrote a book called I Wired. It was that the name of the book, right, Ian? It's a little old now, but he talks about how to negotiate device use with kids. And so it's worth looking at and worth looking at his information. And I bet you if you do a Google Scholar and Google his name, you might get some shorter articles. But that's all good advice. Let's see. Yes, we will send you the slides so that you can look at them again. Oh, good, Ian. Thanks a lot. Let's see. Any other questions?
Joan, there was one that was a little bit higher up that says, does a child with EF deficits typically catch up, but maybe at a slower pace?
That's a great question. So I completely missed it. It depends. It depends upon how difficult, how impaired, or how challenged a child is with executive functions. So there are children that pick up these strategies. They pick up the trapper with the color-coded folders, and they pick up the Google Classroom, and they love the explicit teaching, and they pick up the explicit writing process that we use. Just amazing. And then there are some kids who resist writing their work down, their homework down. It depends. Christina's shaking her head yes. It depends on the child. I would say that even the children that have the most challenges, you'll see some improvement 8th grade, you'll see some improvement junior year. But when kids are really challenged, and it's very difficult for them to remember, to be organized, to get things done, and they won't do external organizers, you really have to think very carefully about sending them away to college. At least for the first 2 years, because that's when party happens. And unless they will key into a strong student disability or student services program or professional, it's not going to be great. And so then what happens is that self-fulfilling prophecy, I'm not smart, I'm stupid, I can't do anything, is going to happen because there is absolutely no organizational strategies in college. You are totally on your own. And so it just depends on the child. But I would say when children have strong executive functioning coaching, it's very helpful. And so if your school does not provide embedded strategies, especially as the kid gets to middle school and high school, it's worth the expenditure to have an executive coach work with them once a week or twice a week. Or maybe you start out with twice a week and then, it goes down to once a week, and just to help that child learn those strategies and put them into place independently. It depends on the child. I would say a lot of the children do improve, but there are some, despite our best efforts, and that's the ones when they graduate from 8th grade, and I look at them and I say, sweet baby, I hope you marry well. Because you need a partner who is going to really be helpful to you and love you for all your isms. My daughter's husband is the most brilliant, wonderful guy in the whole world, but you know, organization is not the strong strength. And so before they were getting married, I don't know what he was before the wedding. It was, you know, I don't know, something happened and she was getting a little frustrated. I said, sweet dear, here's the deal. He's a wonderful young man. He's going to be a great husband, a great daddy. You're going to enjoy life with him, but every now and then he's going to aggravate you because you are so organized and he is not. So just accept it. You're probably going to have to pack a suitcase for him when you go away. You're probably going to have to do a lot of other organizational things for him, but just chuckle and love him for it, because if you don't, you're going to spend your life aggravated. So he's very lucky that he has her, and he has helped her be a little less oriented on the organization. So, you know, it's a yin and a yang. What else? Anything else? All right. It is 8:30, guys. I was predicting that we would do 15 minutes over. I appreciate the fact that you're here. I am so happy to talk about this stuff. I'm kind of like, you know, it's kind of like to get the hook and say, okay, Joan, it's time to stop, because this is one of my great loves to talk about this topic. But I appreciate you. We are always here. If you have any questions, if you need assessment, or if you want somebody to go through your paperwork and help you understand assessments that you've had, you know, we're here for the community. So, and our mission is to make life doable for kids, whether it's in school or whether it's, you know, with their emotional, behavioral. So it's all about kids in our world. So thank you for being here. We appreciate you, and have a great rest of the night.